Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and I'm here with David Kirkpatrick, and we got some good Kentucky history to talk about. David, how you doing?
Doing great. You?
Pretty good. It's a nice summer day. Wink, wink, hint, hint. Seeing that we're recording this in the first week of March, but hopefully, hopefully we're accurate in our time, I guess. But we have a big topic. We're kind of shifting a little bit over. We typically are talking about the frontiersmen, the first 30 years of established Kentucky, but we're in about 1900 in Western Kentucky. So completely different area, time period, and so forth. But it's a big topic. The Night Riders. The Night Riders of Kentucky. The Black Patch Wars. A big part of Kentucky history. Really.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess, where do you want to start at? Do we start in like Kentucky, the situation of Kentucky, the setting of Kentucky? Does that sound like a good starting point?
I think so. And we've had some conversations in other videos about how much Kentucky is changing at around 1900. And, we referenced earlier, there are feuds going on in Eastern Kentucky that are sort of left over from the Civil War, or as people kind of go into modernity, there's arguments and eventually violence over toll gates and how Kentucky should manage a road system in Central Kentucky. And then this is just an extension of that. It's Western Kentucky, like you said. And as people are working to get their goods to market, what they're seeing is that middleman who buys from the farmer and takes it to the tobacco companies. The number of companies that did that has shrank until you finally get down to basically one, and that's the American Tobacco Company, and ran by the infamous James Duke. And when you're the only show in town, you can set your own prices, and so he drastically undercuts what the farmers have been getting up to this point, getting around between 8 and 12 cents a pound for tobacco, and they're down about 4 cents. So in his mind, he's going to turn a tidy profit, but people are not willing to submit to that, and they have to find ways to address that in any way they can.
That's right. And I mean, what do you expect people to do when you pretty much take away their livelihood in a way, take away what they're used to, and all sorts of things? It changes your life. You're going to have a bit of a I'll use the word rebellion, but a bit of a kickback, I guess would be a better way to say it.
Yeah.
And throughout, I mean, you talk about Kentucky's during this time period, the feuds in Eastern Kentucky. Also, a governor was assassinated, at the turn of the
Right.
century, right there at 1900. Um, Kentucky is a bit of a getting that name, of a rough place. And I think this is where that
Yeah.
reputation kind of comes from. This 30, 40 years from 1870 to 1920. And that's kind of where we
Yeah.
get a little bit of a rough name.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. There's even the governors at that time don't come off well in the history books because they're very hands off, and it
yeah,
is very
yeah,
obvious in some of these things that happen.
yeah, and it's just it's interesting, which we'll get into. We'll get into all that. Like you said, James Buck Duke is kind of the, I guess if you want to say, the villain in this story, or the first villain cause of all this stuff, and the American Tobacco Company. And I mean, if we need another reason in Kentucky to not like Duke, this is the James Duke that Duke
Right.
University then then gets its name from, and so forth. So, man, I just
From
can't
the
handle
very
it.
beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the rivalries, the sports rivalries started so early, way before people even knew.
That's right. He probably had someone named Christian Leitner like working for him too. I've not confirmed that, but that would just make the story come full circle.
It would, yeah, yeah. So, in about 1890, that's when those antitrust laws were established, but they really weren't enforced much. And I say this, but sometimes many laws, I guess, that are kind of made in some scenarios are good, just laws that are helpful and meaningful, but they don't really get going until there's a reason to push them, I guess, if that makes sense. And this is one of those reasons that kind of get it going, I guess, to say the
Yeah.
least. Um, which we all know about the monopolies during that time. You had, Vanderbilt was that? I think that's
Right.
right. Vanderbilt, Rockefeller,
Yes.
all those big names that you kind of read about. This is all during that time. Um,
Oil, steel, railroads, all those are controlled by a very select group of people.
yeah, and people kind of, the people that are doing all the work and so forth, kind of catch wind or kind of getting fuel in that fire, and eventually they do pass some legislation, and then eventually it begins to be enforced, and if you want to say trickle down, but they're taking these farmers, taking out the middleman, getting or I guess becoming the only middleman,
Right.
and dropping the prices, and of course this is going to cause a lot of issues, kickback, and that's where we begin. Um, and I think on September 24th, 1904, an opposition, I guess, is formed, and some fellers named Felix Ewing, Joe,
Hmm.
and Charles Fort, and about 1,000 other farmers meet up in Guthrie, Kentucky. And if you don't know where Guthrie, Kentucky is, it is in Western Kentucky, Todd County, and it is right, real close to the Tennessee-Kentucky border. Um, Now, there is some of this that happens in Tennessee. We won't really talk much about that. Um, a lot of it's very similar, but these tobacco farmers all get together and kind of say, "Hey, we're going to undercut Duke, and we're going to fight back. Not
Right.
not physically or violently, but this group says, "Hey, we're going to fight back," and they take upon the name the Planters Protective Association.
Right.
And so there you go. That's kind of where we set up. We get the PPA and Buck Duke. That's kind of our two sides of this, I guess. And
Yes.
um, that's pretty much a pretty good setup, right?
Right.
Um, Anything to add to that?
Yeah, they're gonna, as you said, they're gonna try to put the squeeze on Duke because it's harder than it might appear on the surface to pivot as a farmer from one crop to another. You know, you spent your life doing tobacco, you know how to do it, you got the tools for it, you got the
Mhm.
barns where you can hang it. And of course, in Western Kentucky, they smoke it in smokehouses, which is different than here. So you have the setup. You can't just pick a new crop without there being huge costs. And so you're right. They fight back the only way they can, and that's go ahead, grow your tobacco, and we'll store it. And until they give us a decent price, we won't sell it.
Mm-hmm. But there's another side to this whole thing, and that's where the Night Riders come into. So this sounds like a good plan, and for the most part, it works to a good extent.
Mhm.
But not everybody is joining the PPA or the association, and that's what they need. That's what the association needs is pretty much like 100% cooperation with
Yes.
everybody in order to really go against Duke. But that's not exactly what they get. There's people that are in the middle. It's like, you know what? I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing. I'm gonna sell it to the same people I'm gonna sell it to, and so forth. But that's not helping the PPA. And that's where
Yeah.
we get in. How does the PPA get those people to join? And that's where the Night Riders come in again.
Right.
Uh,
Because as you said, Felix has the warehouse. You mentioned him earlier, and he's
mhm,
more than willing to hold it. But it really only works if you're a farmer that has some sort of cash reserves that you don't have to have cash immediately.
mhm.
But if it comes down to you want to get paid a fair price, but if it's take a poor price or lose my home because I can't pay the mortgage, it's a difficult choice for a lot of those guys to make.
Yeah, and this kind of sets up the many of the issues that are to come. And you think about like I kind of whenever I'm reading up on this, think about how Civil War, houses divided. Same stuff kind of goes on throughout this whole process. You have families that say, a brother joins the PPA, another brother doesn't,
Right.
and it becomes family conflicting. A lot of problems arise, and you kind of get this brother versus brother mentality again when all this is going on. Um, but the big standouts, I guess, of this whole scenario is the Night Riders. And they basically were formed out of PPA members. And
Right.
PPA members, though, that wanted to go the next step,
Yeah.
wanted to say, okay, we need full cooperation. We need all the farmers in. We need to get everybody who is even growing tobacco to join us. Because if that happens, Buck Duke bends to our will.
Right.
But how are you going to do that? How are you going to convince these people to join up if they don't want to? And that is violence.
Yeah, that's where they came in. Yeah, because the ATC, they kind of start fighting back themselves. The people that will still sell to them, they kind of go back to that old pricing system. So they're rewarding the loyalty of the few people who are there. And you're right. There are some people who say, well, if we can't persuade people with words, we're going to have to persuade them with something a little more than that. And of course, you get Dr. David Amos of Caldwell County. I think his house is still down there, right? You can still visit his house.
Yes,
I
yes.
think.
It's a whole museum, I believe, for all the Snipe
Yeah.
Rider stuff. It's interesting, but yeah,
Yeah, and
go on.
he's an interesting character too because talk about an interesting background. He's a doctor. He's also a farmer, but he also spent some time at one of those little military institutes that used to be so popular. So he has some basic form of military training,
Mhm.
and he's more than willing to lead these guys. And you can understand kind of the conflict in their mind. You're going after your neighbors, and you're going to intimidate them, and if they don't listen, you're going to burn their tobacco crop. But in the back of your mind, in the end, you're telling yourself this is going to benefit them too. It's going to benefit
Yeah.
everybody. And so
Mhm.
if we cause some pain in the short term, you know, more power to us later on. So that's where that begins. And you're right; they're called the Night Riders, sometimes called the Silent Brigade. Folks would try to
Also,
silent. Yeah,
the inner circle. They had many kind of I guess names, personas they took on. But with what you said about David Amos, so he went to the Major Farrell's Military School in Hopkinsville,
there we go.
and
Yes,
and it does kind of baffle you that he has some military training, and he goes out and gets these farmers and says, "Okay, I'm going to train you in this military form," and that's what he does. I mean, it
right.
kind of is, just a guy, a doctor again, that is and a farmer who goes and takes this into his own hands and starts preparing on this. Now, to preface this, now he is rumored to believe to be the Night Riders' leader,
Mm.
and kind of the person behind all this, pulling all the strings. And it's one of those things that it's never really connected that he was, working with PPA and all this kind of stuff. But it's one of those things, especially now, 120 years later, it looks pretty obvious that
Yeah,
he was the one behind it all. He was the one that was in the PPA, but did not feel the PPA was doing what it needed to do in order to get these people to join.
yeah,
Because as soon as these tactics started to taking place, people started joining the PPA,
that's right.
and their numbers increased.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
um,
1906 and 1907, the American Tobacco Company had refused to buy PPA, tobacco, and they were going to try to squeeze them out. So this gave people the push they needed to. You're going to have to pick a side. You can't ride the fence anymore. And yeah, he had some persuasive tactics.
yeah, yeah. So we'll go ahead, I guess, and kind of start. Excuse me. Well, getting into some of those things. So, basically, if you were not in the PPA, they would, uh, you know, approach you first to join, obviously. But then if you didn't, then they went on to the next steps. You talked about, burning their crop, but it went even further than that.
Mm,
Um, they would raid towns. They would burn tobacco warehouses. They would scrape tobacco beds, be a tobacco bed scraper. That was a very bad crime
yeah,
that would be committed. I mean, if you think we talked about this earlier, I'm growing tobacco. That's my living. Somebody comes and ruins my tobacco beds in the middle of the season, or at the beginning. A farmer loses a day. That's not good. That's
oh yeah,
a that's I don't know exactly the money term, but that's a good amount of money. If
right.
a farmer loses a crop, that's like you said earlier. That could be lose your house, your mortgage, everything.
Yeah, you
Um,
can't just restart in October. You've got to wait for the growing season. And
all that stuff.
oh yeah,
So one of the first raids takes place in Princeton, Kentucky. Is it
yes,
which is that in Caldwell County?
hmm yep.
Okay,
And
yeah.
December of 1906
Yes,
is
I think December 1st, 1906.
okay.
This takes place in Princeton, and they've been trained. They know what they're doing. They come in and pretty much take over the town, to say it in that sense. And this is not the last time this happens, but they come in, they hold up the town, they get all the citizens, round them up. They use their torches. They go to the factories. They burn down the factories. And at this one in Princeton, one of the largest factories in the world is
Yes,
here in is there in Western Kentucky, and they burn it down. So pretty big statement, you know.
it is, and it's a big step up for them as well, because it's one thing. They had rules from the beginning. You never approach a farmer with less than like 5 people in a group. You always want to command that feeling of being in control of the situation. But there's a huge difference in 5 guys showing up at a farmhouse, in rural Caldwell County, and someone coming into an actual county seat. And like you said, it was well thought out. This isn't we're going to ride into town and toss a torch at the tobacco warehouse and hope it catches. I mean, they made sure they cut off anyone who could offer some support. So you're seizing the city water supply, so the fires can't be put out. You're seizing telegraph offices. If there's a telephone, switchboard in the town, you're controlling that, so reinforcements can't be called for. It's very much a military operation, and meets with
Yeah.
great success. It was two giant warehouses, and you mentioned the one, but they get 2 warehouses in Princeton, something like that.
Um. Well, yes, yeah,
Maybe
more
I'm
than
thinking
one.
of
I might have said, yeah, yeah. There was more than
yeah.
one. Uh, but yeah, and that's the thing. Like you come in there, you come into a town, and I mean, this is you would think, well, how did they do this? Well, they had a lot of people. There wasn't just
Oh yes,
five men. It was 20, 30, and there's some speculation as well that there was times there was 300 people. 300 people rolled
Yes.
into, say, Hopkinsville. And, I'm not necessarily equipped with the census records for 1910 and those sorts of times, but most of those cities that are, Hopkinsville and so forth, that are kind of bigger now, were bigger then as well, compared to, say, Guthrie was not that big of a town. It wasn't, but Hopkinsville would have
Right.
been a lot
Yeah.
bigger. So you think about a town of Hopkinsville, if they rolled in with 300 some men, they would not be ready for that. They would not know how to defend against that unless they had what comes next. So after some of these raids that took place, the town of Hopkinsville gets alert that there might be a raid coming to Hopkinsville. So then a militia is kind of formed. It is commanded by Major Erskine Birch Bassett. I believe if I said that, I believe I said that right. But he kind of becomes the head of the police force and kind of prepares the town. Say, okay, this could happen, so forth and so on. Now this is in 1907, so about a month later. But nothing
Mhm.
happens in Hopkinsville for a while until about December, and the Night Riders they strike in Hopkinsville. Um, Same kind of maneuvers. Go to the telegraph, uh, or not a telegraph building, I guess is what it would be.
Mhm.
Cut the wires. Nobody can call for help. You'll get the water supply under control. Take out the uh, fire station, police station, train depot. It's
Yeah.
it's a crazy process, but that's exactly what they did. They would take control of a town, and then where's the tobacco? Let's burn it down. So,
Yeah, and the interesting thing with Hopkinsville is the reason it takes them so long, and Bassett does a good job because they're sending spies into town. And they would do this. They did this in Princeton and other places too. You have guys that come in and just kind of shoot the breeze with the locals, have a look around, and come back out, and they're impressed enough with what Bassett's doing that they wait, as you say, several months because they're worried about state guard, they're worried about local militia. And when they do go in, they go in with such a vengeance. And I've always wondered about trains. I guess they're carrying the tobacco to market, and that's the thought process behind that. But, you know, not that it's not a tragedy otherwise, but money talks. And some of these huge, train companies and railroad companies, you're going to get their attention.
yeah.
And that's where one of the few casualties happened, wasn't it? Wasn't someone shot in the back in Hopkinsville trying to put out a fire
Hmm.
at on a train?
Yes, a train. Yeah, one of the, I don't know if it was a conductor or what, but one of the train yard people was shot in the back and killed. And that's a thing. Surprisingly enough, now as we get on through the story, more people are killed. I guess
Mhm. Yes.
and things get more violent, to say that. But in the beginning, like the first few little bit, not a lot of casualties, I guess. Mainly because they were so well done that you had what could you do?
Right.
Eventually, like at Hopkinsville, Bassett was able to climb out of a window, go and round up some men to kind of get the Night Riders out. But honestly, they basically had to wait until the Night Riders just left because there were so many, and
Yeah.
then they were able to pursue them and uh, on horseback. They were able to then the Night Riders split up. They ended up catching up with one group. Ended up in a shootout in that group. Shot, I think, two Night Riders or so. But
Mhm.
then Amos got away. They did not find him, which
Yes.
again was presumed to be the leader of all this. Um,
And he was wounded at Hopkinsville, I think, right?
yeah, and you mentioned this before, but yeah, the people they would come in and they would be, I mean, scouting. That's what they were doing, scouting out what does these people have going on here, and they would stay a few days or whatever, and then report back or however it may be. Um, I wish I had the number right off for the Hopkinsville because that was one of the bigger ones. The number of Night Riders to believe because they go to other places. They go to places like Russellville and on and on. We could talk about. There's a book out there that has all the Knight Riders raids in it, and I'm talking about 100, 200 some raids,
Oh
and
yes.
it wasn't just Western Kentucky. They got as far as Mason County, I know of,
Right.
Bracken County, um, but yeah, there're just so many. And now some of them possibly could have just been a family squabble,
You blamed it
and
on that.
it was chalked up to be a Night Riders incident. That could be possible as well. But yeah, so they go to a place in Russellville that had 55 masked men come in and burn tobacco factories, and so forth. But again, I don't know if we even talked about this. They masked. They were always masked.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if you Google Night Riders, or the Kentucky Black Patch Wars, Night Riders, and so forth, and watch some of the videos on the YouTube channel that we did about them. Their costumes are quite comical. I mean, to say
Oh
the
yeah.
least.
But being after dark and they've got torches and they're kind of gliding silently because you sound
Oh yeah.
that's a kind of a frightening thing to come up on.
It would be. It would be. It would be quite intimidating. Um, and plus, people would be on edge because this was happening
Mm.
all over the area, state, if you want to say it like that. Um, but it would be pretty spooky. And for those listeners who may or may not know, that the costumes remind me a lot of, say, a Slipknot costume mask.
Mm.
Yeah, something
Yeah.
to that if you're familiar with the band. Anyway, I don't know. I doubt any listeners are, but if they were, um, but but we talk about town raids. That's not it. That's not the only thing they would do. They would go into a town and single out one person, whether it
Mm.
be a farmer who would not join the PPA, or a farmer, or just merchant in general who did not buy PPA tobacco. And
Right.
in some incidents, they would roll in. There's an incident in Dawson Springs where they roll in. They're looking for a man. He's at the hotel. They go to the hotel. They ask the hotel clerk, "Hey, where's this person staying?" Hotel clerk refuses to tell them. They proceed to then shoot up the hotel, bust it in, go room to room, knocking on the door. There's incidents where one guy poked his head out just to see what was going on, and they shot at him. So eventually, they were able to get the man out that they were seeking, took him out, whipped him in the streets, and then took him out farther outskirts of town, whipped him some more, and actually would bring a witness. So like they're after John Smith. Well, they're going to
Mhm.
take Tim Smith too, so he can watch, and then John Smith has to confess that he will not buy non PPA tobacco again.
Right.
And Tim Smith's the witness.
Yes. Sends you back into
So
town.
yeah. So the level of cruelty. I mean, it's almost like a gangster mob kind of thing when you think about it.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely. And it spreads to where they're attacking sharecroppers too. I mean, you're attacking people who don't even own the tobacco, but you're working in the fields. And if you
mhm.
can stop the labor force for those folks, then you've got a leg up. And some of that turned particularly gruesome.
Yeah. There was another case where I'm trying to think. I think it was what's it called? Birmingham, Kentucky, not Alabama, where they roll in to some sharecroppers, and
Right.
which are majority African American. It's the Birmingham community basically in Marshall County. There is was primarily African American, and they came in and threatened and shot up the place, and ended up shooting a man and his grandson,
Yeah.
which does not sit well with the community. But these things, I mean, again, there's hundreds of stories about this and newspaper articles. If you just go to the Library of Congress and type in Night Riders, Kentucky, and you're going to get loads of articles. And some of them are similar, of course, and talking about the same stuff. But um, myself has spent many, many hours reading a bunch of them, but it's very interesting. Before we mention anything else, there's also some loads of books too. When I say loads of books, there's about five or six that you can find out there. Um, there's one. Well, I'll say that. I'll put those in the comments and the description. Some of the books you can find about all this stuff and so forth. Go on from there. We're gonna stop right there, talking with David Kirkpatrick about the Night Riders, and we'll pick up again next week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/KYHistoryPod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you. The viewers, the listeners, we want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.